The air in the Willow Creek Club dining room was thick with the scent of money. Old money. New money. It all smelled the same. A mix of expensive perfume, aged leather, and the faint, sweet aroma of roasted duck. Crystal glasses clinked. Silverware scraped gently against porcelain plates. The conversations were a low, confident hum. The sound of people who never had to raise their voices to be heard. I sat beside Julian, my hand resting lightly on his arm. For 6 months, he had been my world. He was kind, funny, and saw me in a way no one else ever had. He was also Julian Prescott, son of Arthur Prescott, the man who sat at the head of our long, polished mahogany table. Arthur was a titan of industry, a man whose empire, Prescott Industries, was a legacy built on steel, concrete, and corporate takeovers. He looked like a king holding court. His suit was tailored to perfection. His silver hair was immaculate. And his eyes, a cold, calculating blue, missed nothing. Tonight was my official introduction to his inner circle. The board members, their elegant wives, the trusted advisors. I wore a simple black dress. It was tasteful, expensive, and my own. But in this room, surrounded by glittering diamonds and couture gowns, I felt like I was wearing a costume. I didn't belong to this world, and Arthur Prescott wanted to make sure I never forgot it. He had been watching me all evening, his gaze sharp and dismissive. He asked me about my family, my education, all my work. Each question felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. I answered politely, keeping my voice even. I told him I ran a small consulting firm, a boutique operation. It wasn't a lie, just a carefully edited version of the truth. The main course had been cleared. Dessert was being served. Some kind of chocolate lava cake with a raspberry. Arthur tapped his wine glass with a silver spoon, and the low hum of conversation immediately died. Every face at the table turned toward him. Julian squeezed my hand under the table, a nervous gesture I was starting to know well. Arthur smiled, but it was a predator's smile. It didn't reach his eyes. He looked directly at me, his voice carrying across the silent room with practiced ease. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, raising his glass. "To my son, Julian." He paused, letting the moment hang in the air. Julian straightened up, a proud, hopeful look on his face. "May he soon realize," Arthur continued, his eyes still locked on mine, "that his future, the Prescott legacy, deserves better than street garbage and a borrowed dress." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that I could hear the fizz of the champagne bubbles in the glasses. Dozens of pairs of eyes, once filled with polite curiosity, now turned on me with a mixture of pity, morbid fascination, and cold judgment. The words hit me with physical force, stealing the air from my lungs. Street garbage. A borrowed dress. He had said it so casually, so cruelly, as if he were commenting on the weather. Julian's face went pale. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" he whispered, his voice tight with shock. But I didn't hear him. I was focused on Arthur. He held his glass steady, a small, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had done this deliberately. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to break me in front of everyone who mattered in his world. He wanted to show his son and everyone else that I was nothing. A temporary amusement to be discarded. For a single blazing second, pure unadulterated rage washed over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wine in his arrogant face. I wanted to tell him exactly who I was. But then another feeling took over. It was a cold, quiet clarity. The kind that comes after a lightning strike has lit up the entire landscape. The game was over. The pretense was gone. He had shown me his true face. And in doing so, he had handed me all the power. My movements were slow, deliberate. I gently removed my hand from Julian's arm. I placed my napkin neatly on the table. I pushed my chair back, the sound echoing slightly in the stunned silence. And then I stood up. I was calm. My hands weren't shaking. My voice, when I spoke, was steady and clear. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. I looked directly at Arthur Prescott, meeting his cold blue eyes without flinching. "Thank you," I said, my words precise and measured. "Thank you for finally being honest." I held his gaze for another moment, letting my words sink in. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. He had expected tears. He had expected a scene. He had not expected this quiet, unshakable dignity. Then I turned. Not looking at Julian. Not looking at any of the other horrified faces. I just turned and walked away. Every step I took away from that table was an act of will. The dining room of the Willow Creek Club was vast. A sea of white tablecloths and polished silver. It felt like a mile from our table to the grand arched doorway. With each step, I could feel the weight of their eyes on my back. It was a physical pressure, a force that tried to push me to the ground. I could hear the whispers starting, a rustle of sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. They were dissecting me. My dress. My background. My very existence in their exclusive world. Julian's voice called out behind me, desperate and thin. "Eliza. Wait. Please." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. If I looked back, if I saw the pleading in his eyes, I might falter. And faltering was not an option. Arthur Prescott was watching me. I could feel his gaze, cold and heavy. He thought he had won. That smirk on his face wasn't just about insulting me. It was about asserting his dominance, about putting me back in what he believed was my place. He thought my composure was a fragile mask that would crack the second I was out of his sight. He was waiting for the crumble. I would rather die than give him the satisfaction. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic trapped bird. My mind was a whirlwind of hurt and fury. Street garbage. The words echoed, trying to find a crack in my armor. He had no idea where I came from, what I had overcome. He saw a simple dress and a quiet demeanor and assumed weakness. He saw a woman who loved his son and assumed she was a gold digger. He had judged me, condemned me, and executed me publicly without knowing a single true thing about me. A young waiter, his face pale with shock, flattened himself against a wall as I passed. An older woman at a nearby table, dripping in pearls, stared at me with undisguised contempt. Her look said it all. Of course. What else did you expect? This was their world. Their rules. I was an intruder, and I had just been efficiently removed. I pushed through the ornate double doors and entered the grand lobby. It was all marble floors, towering floral arrangements, and oil paintings of stern-faced men who had probably founded this club a century ago. The air here was cooler, but it did nothing to quell the fire in my veins. Eliza. Julian had followed me. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Please, just stop. Let me talk to you. I stopped and turned to face him. His face was a mess of confusion and distress. His hair was disheveled where he had run his hands through it. What is there to talk about? Julian? I asked, my voice still unnervingly calm. He's an old man. He's from a different generation. He didn't mean it like that. He stammered. The excuse is already forming. Weak and pathetic. He meant it exactly like that, I said, looking past him back toward the dining room. I could see his father through the doorway, still seated at the head of the table. He wasn't looking at us. He was calmly taking a sip of his wine. The perfect picture of a man in control. The king was on his throne, confident that the peasant uprising had been quashed. That single image solidified my resolve. I pulled my arm from Julian's grasp. He wanted to see if you would choose him or me, I said softly. And you're still here making excuses for him. That's all the answer I need. That's not fair, he protested. I'm here with you. Are you? I asked, my voice hardening slightly. Or are you here to manage the situation, to smooth things over so you don't have to deal with the fallout tomorrow? He had no answer for that. The truth of it was written all over his face. He loved me. I believed that. But he was terrified of his father. He had lived his entire life in that man's shadow, seeking an approval that was always just out of reach. I turned and continued my walk. The doorman in his crisp uniform rushed to open the heavy glass door for me. He avoided my eyes. A small professional courtesy that I was strangely grateful for. The cool night air hit my face. A welcome shock. I walked down the stone steps, past the line of valet-parked cars, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, Mercedes, symbols of a world I had no desire to be a part of. Not if it meant bowing down to men like Arthur Prescott. I refused to look back. I refused to let them see me as a victim. In their story, I was the girl who was cruelly put in her place. In my story, I was the woman who walked away with her head held high. I focused on the sound of my heels clicking on the pavement. A steady rhythmic beat. Left. Right. Left. Right. Each step was a tiny victory. Each step took me further away from the poison of that room. The humiliation was a physical thing. A hot, bitter taste in the back of my throat. But underneath it, something else was growing. A core of steel. A quiet, cold anger that was far more powerful than the loud, explosive rage I had felt for a second. Arthur Prescott thought he had broken me. He had no idea what he had just started. The valet pulled my car around. It was a 5-year-old Toyota Camry. Clean and reliable. It looked comically out of place next to the gleaming luxury sedans that lined the club's entrance. In the past, I'd felt a flicker of self-consciousness about it. Tonight, I felt a surge of pride. This car was mine. I had bought it with my own money, earned through my own work. It represented my independence. It was my escape vehicle. I handed the young man a $20 bill and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of the leather and vanilla air freshener was a small comfort. I put the key in the ignition, but didn't turn it. I just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I let myself breathe. Inhale. Exhale. The composure I had maintained through the lobby and down the steps was beginning to fray at the edges. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my rayed cheek. I angrily wiped it away. Not here. Not yet. Just as I was about to start the engine, my passenger door opened. Julian slid into the seat beside me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights. He looked wrecked. "Eliza, please," he began, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Don't leave like this." I turned to look at him. Really, look at him. I saw the man I had fallen in love with. The easy smile. The warm eyes. The way he would absent-mindedly play with a stray strand of my hair. But tonight, all of that was overshadowed by the weakness. The ingrained fear of his father. How else am I supposed to leave? "Julian?" I asked. My voice was tired. Should I have stayed? Should I have sat there and quietly finished my dessert while your father and his friends looked at me like I was something they had scraped off their shoe? No. Of course not. What he did was... It was unforgivable. He said, running his hands through his hair again in that agitated way. "I'll talk to him. I'll make him apologize. I swear I will make him call you and apologize." I almost laughed. The sound that came out was small and bitter. "An apology?" I shook my head slowly. "You don't get it. This isn't about an apology. An apology is what you give when you accidentally step on someone's foot. This was not an accident. This was a declaration of war. He drew a line in the sand tonight. Julian. He told me and everyone else in that room that I will never be good enough for his family. For his legacy. So, we'll make our own legacy, he insisted, his eyes bright with unshed tears. We don't need him. We don't need his money. I wanted to believe him. Oh, how I wanted to believe him. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. The two of us against the world, building a life far away from the toxic influence of Arthur Prescott. But it was a fantasy. Julian had never known a life without his father's money, without the Prescott name opening every door for him. He worked at Prescott Industries, lived in a condo his father paid for, drove a car his father had given him for graduation. He was a prince in a gilded cage, and he didn't even know where the door was, let alone have the key. Your father said what he really feels. Julian, I said, my voice softening. It was a painful truth, but he needed to hear it. He doesn't hide his opinions. That's one thing you can say for him. He was being honest. And now we know. We know exactly where we stand. Where we stand. He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Eliza. Don't say it. The tears were flowing freely down his face now, and seeing him cry broke a piece of my heart. I hated his father for doing this to him, for putting him in this impossible position. But my pity for Julian couldn't change the reality of our situation. To be with him would mean a lifetime of fighting a battle I couldn't win. It would mean constantly being undermined, disrespected, and made to feel small by a man who held all the power in his son's life. I couldn't live like that. I wouldn't. I reached out and gently brushed the tears from his cheek with my thumb. Then I leaned over and kissed his forehead. It was a tender final gesture. A kiss of goodbye. Not the passionate kiss of a lover, but the gentle, sorrowful kiss of someone letting go. It's over. Julian, I whispered against his skin. It has to be. My heart was breaking. It was a sharp physical pain in my chest. I was losing the man I loved. But as I pulled away and looked into his devastated eyes, I knew I was doing the right thing. This pain, this acute heartbreak would eventually fade. The slow, corrosive pain of staying in a situation that was designed to destroy my spirit would have been 1,000 times worse. This was an amputation. It was brutal and bloody, but it was necessary to save myself. He just stared at me, speechless. The finality of my words finally registering. Goodbye, Julian, I said softly. I didn't wait for him to respond. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving him sitting in my empty passenger seat under the ridiculously opulent lights of the Willow Creek Club. I looked in the rearview mirror once. He was still there, a solitary figure, watching me go. Then I turned the corner and he was gone. The heartbreak was real, but it wasn't for long. It was already being replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve. The highway stretched out before me. A ribbon of dark asphalt cut by the rhythmic flash of white lines. The city skyline glittered in the distance. A cold and beautiful constellation of man-made stars. I drove automatically, my mind a million miles away. The scene at the club played on a loop. The silence. The smug look on Arthur's face. The pity in the eyes of strangers. The heartbreak on Julian's. Each replay stoked the fire inside me. The initial shock and hurt were beginning to cool, hardening into something else. It was a feeling I knew well, a feeling I hadn't had to call upon in years. It was the quiet, methodical fury that had fueled me through the hardest years of my life. It was the engine that had driven me to build my company from nothing. Arthur Prescott thought he was dealing with a naive young woman in love with his son. He had no idea he had just picked a fight with a battle-hardened CEO. He called me garbage. He assumed my dress was borrowed. He dismissed me as a footnote in his son's story. He believed my entire world revolved around my relationship with Julian. He thought the worst thing he could do to me was take that away. He was about to learn how small his world really was. My hand was steady as I reached for my phone. I tapped the screen, my thumb hovering over my favorites list. There was only one person I could call. The only person in the world who knew the full story, who understood every move I had ever made. Sarah Jennings. She wasn't just my assistant. She was my chief of staff, my head of operations, and my most trusted confidant. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. Eliza. Is everything okay? Her voice was crisp and alert. Even at this late hour, Sarah never truly slept. She just rested in a state of readiness. Everything is fine. Sarah. Better than fine. Actually, I have a directive for you, I said, my voice low and even. I glanced at the digital clock on my dashboard. 10:47 p. M. I'm listening, she said. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. She was already at her computer, ready to execute. I took a deep breath. This was it. The point of no return. The moment the game changed forever. I want you to cancel the Prescott merger, I said. The typing stopped. There was a beat of pure silence on the other end of the line. I could almost feel her shock vibrating through the phone. The Prescott deal was the culmination of 2 years of work. It was a $2 billion merger that would have created one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. It was supposed to be my crowning achievement. The moment Thorne Strategies finally stepped out of the shadows and into the global spotlight. Cancel it, she finally repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Eliza. The final papers are being drawn up. The press conference is scheduled for Monday morning. We're set to close in less than 48 hours. I'm aware of the schedule, I said calmly. I want you to kill it. Send the notification to their legal team. Draft a press release. I don't care what you have to do. I want that deal dead before sunrise. But why? She gasped. What happened? Did their board pull out? Did something leak? No, I said. my voice turning to ice. Nothing like that. Let's just call it a failure to pass the character test. I could hear her processing this, her sharp mind working through the implications. Sarah knew me better than anyone. She knew I was not impulsive. She knew I was a chess player, always thinking 10 moves ahead. For me to make a move like this, something catastrophic must have happened. Okay, she said, her voice shifting from shock to determination. She trusted me completely. That trust was something I valued more than any stock option or market share. Kill the Prescott merger. Is there a specific reason I should give their counsel? No reason, I said. Then I reconsidered. A message needed to be sent. A very clear, very direct message. Actually, yes. Tell them the deal is terminated due to irreconcilable differences in corporate values. Irreconcilable differences in corporate values, she repeated slowly, no doubt typing the words as she said them. Got it. I'll wake up our legal team. I'll get it done. I know you will, I said. Eliza. She hesitated for a moment. Are you all right? The question was so simple, so full of genuine concern that it almost broke through my icy composure. I thought about the humiliation, the heartbreak, the quiet drive away from the man I loved. I will be, I said. And it was the truest thing I had said all night. Kill it, Sarah. Tonight. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The weight in my chest felt a little lighter. It wasn't just about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction of it. It was about principles. I had built my company on a foundation of respect, integrity, and merit. Arthur Prescott represented the opposite of all of that. He was a relic, a dinosaur who believed birthright trumped ability. Merging with his company would have been a betrayal of everything I had worked for. He had called me garbage. He was about to find out what happens when you try to throw me away. Arthur Prescott thought I was a nobody. To him, I was just Eliza Thorne, the pretty quiet girl dating his son, a consultant with a small, insignificant firm, an outsider with no name, no connections, and no power. He and everyone else in his circle had looked at me and seen exactly what I wanted them to see. What he didn't know was that Thorne Strategies wasn't some small-time consulting business. It was the name I had put on the holding company. A deliberately bland and forgettable name. The real powerhouse. The company that Prescott Industries was so desperate to merge with was my subsidiary, Helios Analytics. I was the founder, the CEO, and the sole owner. I was the architect of the very technology that was poised to save his failing, antiquated empire. I had spent the last 10 years of my life building it in the shadows. All for this moment. My story didn't start in a boardroom or a country club. It started in a cramped apartment over a laundromat with the constant hum of the dryers vibrating through the floor. My father left when I was 6. My mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and waiting tables at night just to keep us afloat. She was the one who taught me about quiet strength. I never once heard her complain. She just worked. Her hands raw. Her body tired to give me a chance she never had. The name Thorn was her maiden name. I took it for my company to honor her. The original silent powerhouse in my life. I was a nerdy, awkward kid who found solace in the clean, predictable logic of computers. While other kids were at the mall, I was in the library teaching myself to code. I got a scholarship to Stanford where I felt like an imposter every single day. I was surrounded by kids like Julian. Kids who had grown up with tutors in summer, trips to Europe, who had never worried about a bill in their lives. I worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for my books and food. And I still graduated at the top of my class. After college, I worked for a couple of big tech firms. I saw the way the world worked. I saw brilliant ideas get crushed by corporate bureaucracy. I saw talented women get passed over for promotions in favor of mediocre men with the right connections. And I saw men like Arthur Prescott. Men who inherited their power and used it to bully and intimidate everyone below them. I knew I could never thrive in that world. So, I decided to build my own. I started Helios Analytics in my garage with my entire life savings. A little over $10,000. My first project was a revolutionary data compression algorithm. Something the big companies had said was impossible. I worked for 2 years living on ramen noodles and coffee coding until my eyes blurred. When I finally perfected it, I didn't sell it. I licensed it. The royalty checks started coming in. Small at first, then bigger. I used that money to hire my first employee, a brilliant engineer named Leo Quinn, who was tired of the corporate grind. Together, we started developing what would become our flagship product, a predictive analytics platform powered by a proprietary AI. It could forecast market trends, supply chain disruptions, and consumer behavior with an unheard of 98% accuracy. It was the holy grail for any company. A crystal ball for the modern economy. I made a critical decision early on. I would not seek venture capital. I had seen what happened to founders who took VC money. They lost control. They were forced to chase short-term profits instead of long-term innovation. They answered to a board of investors who cared more about their exit strategy than the company's mission. I would not let that happen. I would own my company outright. That meant growing slower, being leaner, and staying under the radar. The secrecy became my greatest weapon. We operated through the holding company, Thorn Strategies. We kept a low profile. We didn't do splashy press releases. Our offices were in a modest building in an unassuming part of the city. On paper, Eliza Thorn was just a small business owner. But in the circles that mattered, the world of data science and enterprise software, Helios Analytics was a legend. A ghost that was years ahead of everyone else. 6 months ago, I met Julian at a charity gala. I wasn't there to network. A friend had dragged me along. He was different from the other men in suits. He was warm. He was genuine. And he had a laugh that made me feel like the only person in the room. He told me he was a vice president at his father's company. I told him I was a consultant. We fell in love hard and fast. For the first time in my life, I let my guard down. I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't just about work. I kept my company a secret from him. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to love Eliza Thorne. The woman. Not the CEO of Helios Analytics. I wanted something that was real. Separate from the corporate world. When Prescott Industries' CFO first reached out to Thorne Strategies about a potential merger, I almost laughed. They had no idea they were talking to me. The girlfriend of their CEO's son. They were bleeding money. Their old world industries struggling to keep up in a data-driven economy. They were desperate. They needed my AI platform to survive. The negotiations were a carefully orchestrated performance. I let my COO handle the initial meetings. They thought he was the owner. They never even asked about me. To them, the name on the company was just a name. It was the perfect opportunity. I could save the company Julian was destined to inherit. I could finally merge my two worlds. I could step out of the shadows and show him who I really was. It felt like a fairy tale. But tonight, Arthur Prescott had turned that fairy tale into a nightmare. He had shown me that to him. I would never be anything more than an unwelcome accessory. He wasn't just insulting me. He was insulting my mother. My history. Every ounce of work and sacrifice that had gone into building my life and my company. He thought he was a king. He was about to find out he was just a man. A man whose entire empire was at this very moment resting in the palm of my hand, and I was about to close my fist. I didn't sleep that night. I went back to my apartment. A minimalist modern space with panoramic views of the city that Arthur Prescott believed I could never afford. And I waited. I changed out of the black dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor. An artifact from a life that no longer existed. I put on my favorite worn-out sweatshirt and a pair of leggings and curled up on my sofa. My laptop open. My phone on the coffee table beside me. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. The heartbreak over Julian was a dull, constant throb. But underneath it all, a different kind of energy was building. It was the familiar, focused calm that always came over me before a major product launch or a critical negotiation. I was no longer Eliza, the hurt girlfriend. I was Eliza Thorne, CEO, and I was in crisis mode. At 1:13 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. I knew who it was. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Eliza Thorne. Ms. Thorne. This is Walter Finch, CFO of Prescott Industries. His voice was strained, laced with a panic he was trying desperately to conceal. I apologize for the late hour, but I've just received a rather alarming communication from your legal counsel. Mr. Mine. Finch. I replied, my voice cool and professional. I'm sure whatever it is can wait until business hours. No, I'm afraid it can't, he said, his voice rising in pitch. It says you're terminating the merger agreement. Effective immediately. This has to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. We're 48 hours from closing. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds. Long enough to make him uncomfortable. There is no mistake. Mr. Finch, I said finally. Thorn Strategies has withdrawn its offer. The merger is off. But why? He stammered. Our due diligence was perfect. The financials are solid. There hasn't been a single point of contention in months. What could possibly have changed in the last few hours? I thought of Arthur's smug face, of the word garbage echoing in the silent dining room. I could have told him the truth. I could have laid it all out. But I didn't. Let them scramble. Let them wonder. My reasoning is my own, I said. But I will say this. We have concerns about the leadership and corporate culture at Prescott. We no longer see it as a viable partnership. I heard him take a sharp breath. Leadership? You mean Arthur? Is this about Arthur? Did he say something to you? So he knew. He knew his boss was a liability. I suggest you speak with your CEO, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. He has all the information you need. Our decision is final. Mr. Finch, do not contact me again. I hung up before he could respond. I imagined the scene in his office. Or more likely, his lavish study at home. The frantic call he was now making to Arthur Prescott. The confusion. The denial. The dawning horror as Arthur realized that the insignificant girl he had insulted just hours ago had the power to bring his entire world crashing down. The rest of the night was a blur of activity. Sarah and I were in constant communication, orchestrating the fallout with military precision. Our legal team worked through the night to formally dissolve the agreement, ensuring every I was dotted and every T was crossed. There would be no loopholes, no avenues for them to challenge our decision. Our communications team drafted a sterile corporate statement for the press to be released at 6 a.m. sharp. By morning, as the sun began to cast a pale gray light over the city, the news broke. My phone started vibrating incessantly with alerts from every major financial news outlet. Shock move. Thorn Strategies terminates $2B merger with Prescott Industries. Prescott Empire in peril as lucrative tech deal collapses overnight. Sources cite leadership concerns as mysterious Thorn Strategies pulls plug. I watched the pre-market indicators for Prescott Industries stock. It was a bloodbath. The stock was projected to open down 30, maybe 40%. Decades of stability wiped out in a single night. Arthur Prescott's empire, which he guarded so jealously, was beginning to tremble. He had built his legacy on a foundation of intimidation and brute force. He never imagined that the gravest threat would come not from a corporate raider or a market crash, but from a quiet woman in a black dress. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It's done. The world is watching. What's our next move? I looked out my window at the waking city. The hollow ache in my chest was still there. A ghost of the life I had almost had with Julian. But for the first time since I walked out of that country club, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't pain or anger. It was power. Not the loud, arrogant power of men like Arthur Prescott, but a quiet, unshakable power that came from knowing exactly who you are and what you are worth. I texted her back. We wait for the king to come to us. He didn't make me wait. At 9:15 a.m. The intercom on my desk buzzed. It was Sarah. "He's here," she said, her voice tight. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he's refusing to leave." I didn't need to ask who he was. "Let him in," I said calmly. "And please hold all my calls." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office. It overlooked the financial district, a canyon of steel and glass. Far below, the city hummed with activity. My office was the complete opposite of the stuffy, old-world opulence of the Willow Creek Club. It was minimalist and modern with clean lines, concrete floors, and furniture made of glass and chrome. There were no oil paintings of dead founders on the walls, only abstracts by up-and-coming local artists. This was a space I had built. It was my territory. The door opened and Arthur Prescott stormed in. He was not the composed, regal man from the night before. His face was flushed. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his silver hair was out of place. He looked like he hadn't slept. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked his age. Old, tired, and desperate. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the minimalist space. He was trying for intimidation, his default setting, but it came out as a panicked roar. You can't just pull out of a multi-billion-dollar deal 48 hours before closing. Our lawyers will bury you. I turned slowly from the window and met his gaze. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, my expression neutral. I walked over to my desk, not to sit behind it and create a barrier, but to lean against the front of it, placing me on his level. It was a subtle power move, and I could tell it unnerved him. "Your lawyers have already been in touch with mine," I said, my voice even and quiet. "They are well aware that we are within our legal rights to terminate the agreement. The character and fitness clause is quite clear." His face contorted in a sneer. But it was a weak imitation of the one from last night. Character and fitness? That's nonsense. This is about last night, isn't it? This is some petty emotional revenge because I made a little joke at your expense. I laughed. It wasn't a loud or mocking laugh. It was a soft, genuine sound of amusement, and it seemed to infuriate him more than any shout could have. "A joke?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You call public humiliation a joke? You stood up in a room full of your peers and called me street garbage. You announced to the world that I was worthless. That wasn't a joke. Arthur, that was an assessment. You assessed my value and you found it to be 0. He took a step back, flustered. He was used to people cowering, not confronting him with his own words. It was inappropriate, he conceded. his tone shifting from anger to strained reason. A lapse in judgment. I'd had too much wine. I'll apologize. I will call you and I will formally apologize for my remarks. An apology? I echoed my words to Julian from the night before. You seem to think that's a magic word that can undo any damage. It isn't. I pushed myself off the desk and began to walk slowly around him, like a predator circling its prey. Let me explain this to you in terms you might understand. This is no longer a personal matter. It's a business decision. You showed me last night that you are reckless. You are arrogant. You are a man who would risk a $2 billion deal. A deal essential to the survival of your company for the sake of a cheap insult. You are a liability, Arthur. And I do not merge my company with liabilities. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The gears were turning in his head. He was finally truly beginning to understand. He was not talking to his son's insignificant girlfriend. He was talking to the woman who held his company's fate in her hands. His entire demeanor crumbled. The anger, the bluster, it all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, naked fear. Please, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. You don't understand. We need this deal. My company. The board. We won't survive without your technology. Arthur Prescott, the titan of industry. I was begging. To me, I understand perfectly, I said, stopping in front of him. You built an empire for a world that no longer exists. You're a dinosaur. And you see my technology as a way to avoid extinction. And you're right. It would have saved you. I paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You assumed the person you needed to impress was your son. You never once considered that it might be me. For the first time, the king looked small. He slumped into one of the visitor chairs in front of my desk, his body deflating as if all the air had been let out of him. He put his head in his hands. A broken man in a bespoke suit. I looked down at him. Not with pity, not with triumph, but with a cold, clear sense of finality. You insulted me publicly, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Why on earth should I save you privately? I walked back behind my desk and sat down, picking up a pen and turning my attention to a file that was sitting there. The meeting was over. He sat there for another minute, silent. Then he rose, his movements slow and stiff, and walked out of my office without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the quiet. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of justice being served. Arthur Prescott's retreat from my office was not an ending. It was the beginning of the next phase. He had been the figurehead, the loud, blustering monarch. But the real power in a modern corporation doesn't rest with one person. It's a complex web of board members, shareholders, and executives. And that web was in a state of panic. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in corporate chaos. The stock of Prescott Industries was in freefall. Investors were dumping shares as fast as they could. The financial press was in a frenzy, publishing speculative articles about the company's instability and the mysterious leadership concerns that had scuttled the deal of the decade. The king was bleeding and the sharks were beginning to circle. Late that afternoon, I received a call. It wasn't from Prescott Industries. It was from their chief rival, Eliza Thorne. Speaking. Ms. Thorne. This is Marcus Blackwood of Blackwood Corporation. I trust you know who I am. I did. Blackwood was the only other major player in their industry. A leaner, more modern company run by a CEO who was known for his aggressive and opportunistic tactics. Mr. Blackwood. I'm familiar with your work, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Good, he said, his voice smooth and confident. Then you'll understand why I'm calling. I've been reading the news. It seems Arthur Prescott has managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. A remarkable talent of his. Is there a point to this call? Mr. Blackwood? I asked. A very direct one. My sources tell me your technology is revolutionary. The key to the next 50 years in our industry. You were going to merge with that fossil. But now the deal is off. That presents an opportunity for both of us. Blackwood is prepared to make you an offer. A very generous one. It was the move I had been expecting. I appreciate the interest, I said carefully. But Thorne Strategies is not currently seeking a merger. Of course not, he said with a knowing chuckle. But you're a savvy player. Is one misprediction of the lost. Thorne. I can tell. You didn't kill a $2 billion deal on a whim. You have a plan. I'm just suggesting that I could be a part of it. Together, we could acquire Prescott's assets for pennies on the dollar after you've driven them into the ground. We could carve up the empire. He was tempting me with the classic corporate raider strategy. It was a path to immense profit and power. But it wasn't my style. I wasn't a destroyer. I was a builder. And I had a different endgame in mind. Thank you for the call, Mr. Newsit. Blackwood, I said politely. I'll keep your offer in mind. I hung up and immediately called Sarah into my office. I relayed the conversation. She listened intently. Her expression thoughtful. Blackwood smells blood in the water, she said. If we align with him, we could crush Prescott completely. I know, I said. But I don't want to crush Prescott Industries. I want to save it. I just don't want to save Arthur Prescott. Just then, Sarah's personal cell phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her eyes widened slightly. It was a text from an unknown number. She read it, then looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. You're not going to believe this, she whispered. It's from a member of the Prescott board. An anonymous one. They want to talk. They're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss Arthur's fitness to lead. She read the text aloud. The board is ready to bypass him. We believe the merger with your company is the only path forward. We are prepared to take all necessary steps to make that happen. This was it. The moment I had been maneuvering for. The coup was beginning. I smirked. A real, genuine smirk of victory. I thought of Arthur alone in his office or his mansion, watching his life's work crumble around him, completely unaware that his own people were sharpening their knives. He had built his kingdom on fear. But fear is a poor foundation. The moment the king looks weak, the courtiers will turn on him to save themselves. I looked at Sarah, my mind already racing ahead, planning the next 3 moves. Get our new terms ready, I said, my voice filled with a newfound authority. We're not just merging with them anymore. We're taking over. Draft a new proposal. The deal is back on the table, contingent on a complete restructuring of their executive leadership. Sarah grinned, already typing furiously on her tablet. And what should I say if the board asks who we recommend to lead the new restructured company? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline, a city of endless possibilities. Tell them, I said slowly, savoring each word, that Thorn Strategies will consider a partnership with Prescott Industries under new leadership. Arthur Prescott's days as king were numbered, and I was the one writing the proclamation. He appeared at my apartment that evening. I wasn't expecting him. I had assumed he would have retreated to the family compound, caught between his loyalty to me and his fear of his father. When my doorman called up to say Julian Prescott was in the lobby, my first instinct was to say I wasn't home. I wasn't sure I was ready to face him, to see the inevitable excuses and pleading in his eyes again. But I told the doorman to send him up. Whatever this was, it needed to be finished. When I opened the door, I was taken aback. He looked completely different from the broken man I had left at the country club. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. It was clear he had been crying. But there was a new resolve in his face, a firmness around his jaw that I had never seen before. He wasn't there to beg. He was there to make a stand. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked into my living room, looking around the space as if seeing it for the first time. He had been here 100 times, but tonight he was seeing it for what it was. The home of a woman he barely knew. I saw the news. He started, turning to face me about the merger. "It was you, wasn't it? Thorn Strategies. That's you." "Yes," I said simply. There was no point in hiding it anymore. A look of dawning comprehension spread across his face, followed by a sad, ironic smile. "All this time, I thought I was protecting you from my world. It turns out you were the one with all the power." He shook his head in disbelief. He had no idea. He called you garbage, and he was talking to the one person on Earth who could destroy him. He destroyed himself. "Julian," I corrected him gently. He just used me to do it. He took a step closer to me, his eyes searching my face. I came here to tell you something. I spent all of last night and all of today thinking about him. About me. About us. And I realized you were right. I've spent my whole life making excuses for him, defending his behavior, trying to earn his approval, living in his shadow. I was so afraid of disappointing him that I disappointed the one person who actually mattered. His voice was raw with emotion, with the pain of a lifetime of suppressed feelings finally coming to the surface. I went to him this morning. He continued. After I saw the news, I told him he had to fix it. He had to apologize to you sincerely. You know what he said? He said you were a vindictive nobody and that he would crush you. He told me to forget about you, that he'd find me a more suitable wife. He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. That was it. That was the moment it all broke. I'm done. I told him I was resigning from the company, that I didn't want his money. His name. Nothing. I'm done making excuses for him. He was standing right in front of me now, his eyes pleading. I know I messed up. Eliza, I should have stood up for you. I should have walked out of that dining room with you. I was a coward. And I am so sorry. I don't know if I can ever make it up to you, but I have to try. He reached out and took my hands in his. They were warm and steady. If you'll have me, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. I want to build our life together. A real life without his money. Without his influence. Just you and me. We'll get a small apartment. I'll find a new job. I don't care what we have to do. I just want to be with you. I looked into his eyes and I saw the man I had first fallen in love with. The kind, warm, genuine man who had been buried under the weight of his father's expectations. He had finally found his own strength. He had been given a choice between the gilded cage he had always known and a frightening, uncertain future with me. And he had chosen me. He had chosen us. The last of the ice around my heart melted away. I squeezed his hands and lifted one to my lips, kissing his knuckles. That, I whispered, a single tear of my own finally falling. A tear of relief, not of pain. That's why I love you. He pulled me into his arms and I held him tightly, burying my face in his chest. It felt like coming home. We were broken. Yes. But we were broken together. And now finally we could start to build something new. Something real. Something that was entirely ours. The world moves fast when power shifts. What follows a tremor is an earthquake. And what follows an earthquake is the swift, a methodical work of rebuilding. By Monday morning, the emergency board meeting at Prescott Industries was over in less than an hour. Faced with total financial ruin and a formal takeover bid from me, they acted decisively. Arthur Prescott was voted out as CEO and chairman of the board. He didn't even put up a fight. He was a king with no army and no allies. He was forced into a quiet, Ignominious retirement. Effective immediately. By Tuesday. My new merger. Proposal and acquisition in everything but name was unanimously approved. The press release went out announcing a new era of partnership between Prescott Industries and Thorne Strategies focused on innovation, integrity, and forward-thinking leadership. The stock, which had been in a death spiral, stabilized and began to climb. By Thursday, the new leadership structure was announced. I would remain CEO of Thorne Strategies, but would also take Arthur's place as chairperson of the newly merged entity and the new head of strategy for Prescott Industries, tasked with integrating my technology and vision into the old company's framework, was Julian Prescott. He didn't want the job at first, feeling it was a handout. I told him he was the most qualified person on the planet for the role. He knew the company's culture. He understood its people and he believed in our new mission. He was not his father's son. He was his own man now. He accepted. Not as an heir, but as a partner. The Prescott Empire. The one Arthur had tried to protect by casting me out, was now mine. But I hadn't conquered it. I had transformed it. We would spend the coming years rooting out the toxic old guard culture and replacing it with one based on merit and respect. We would build something better. Julian and I rebuilt our life, not in a small apartment as he had offered, but in a world of our own making. Our foundation wasn't his father's money or my company's power, but the hard-won trust and respect we had for each other. He had chosen me when it mattered most, and that was a currency more valuable than any stock price. Arthur Prescott thought he was judging my worth that night at the country club. What he didn't realize was that he was facing a judgment of his own. He failed the test and the price was his kingdom. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. It helps me out a great deal and allows me to create more.